We're going to talk about Foley today.
This is Foley.
Hello there, my name is Colin and welcome back to the Filmmaker Files. And like the intro said, today we're going to be looking a little bit at Foley, but we're also going to be taking a look at some of the sound setups that I showed last week and showing how to use them for dialogue and for recording sound effects. Now before we start, a bit of a disclaimer. I made a bit of a goof and laughed right now. I said that you could plug a lavalier mic directly into your phone, and while that is true for some lavalier mics, it's not true for others. I accidentally linked down in the description of that video the lavalier mics I had, and I forgot that those will not work with your phone. So I'm going to be providing a new link down in the bottom of this video for you to be able to buy a lav mic that will work with your smartphone. So my bad, I'm dumb. Moving on from my transgressions, we are going to be taking a look at that first setup, which was the lavalier mic plugged into a digital audio recorder. So what you're hearing right now is the lavalier mic plugged into the Zoom H1. I've used this in a couple different ways. The first setup is the most obvious, which is for interviews. Well, yeah, you see, I did think that it was incredibly important that when we were coming up with the concept for this film, I knew that I was going to have to go back and try and find ways to make myself look smarter and say that I had planned on that all along, even though I had very clearly no idea what I was doing. You can hide it under clothing, as I kind of showed briefly last episode, especially if you're doing something like dialogue in a film that you don't want to be able to see the lapel mic. Now with that, you got to be a little bit careful, because if they're moving around too much, you can get the clothes rubbing up against the microphone. So now we're going to take a look at a little bit of a different way that I've used this setup before. We had a scene down by a pond, and unfortunately right next to the pond was a water pump that was making just a ton of noise.
It's good to have you home.
And it didn't matter what audio setup we went with, we were just going to get a ton of it in the background. So we took the Zoom H1 and a lapel mic and threw it on one of the actors, handsome devil he is. And we just did that so that later on we knew that we were going to be doing ADR for that scene, but at least we would have cleaner audio that was much closer so that we'd know what we were saying and be able to match it up a lot better. So the second setup I've actually already shown. That was the actual audio setup that I had in the last episode, but since I'm just recording this myself and it's for something like YouTube. But now let's get to the really fun one, which is the boom pole and Foley work setup. Now before we get too deep into talking about the recording setup, I want to take a quick second to talk about some terms. Why terms, you say? Yes, terms. So let's start off with scratch audio. Scratch audio is the sounds that you're going to be getting directly on set. Now a lot of times why scratch audio is not used is because the director is shouting out direction. Obviously they're going to be cutting a lot of that out later. They're going to be using bits and pieces of the audio that they recorded on set that day mixed in with some ADR, another one of our terms. Thanks for coming in today, Steve, to record some ADR. Yeah, it's no problem. I don't mind doing some automated dialogue replacement where you re-record the dialogue by the original actor in post-production to improve your audio quality. Yeah, whatever you say, man. Look, I just need you to say the lines. Oh yeah, sure. No, I'll get right to it. Yeah, I mean, it's important that, you know, sometimes you get the on-set dialogue and that's great quality, but every now and then you gotta go back and you gotta re-record something for whatever reason. Can you just say the lines, please? Okay. Then we have wild tracks or wild lines. Those are sound recordings that are done on set. A lot of times sound effects that you're going to be picking up because maybe you've got a specific kind of environment that's got a specific kind of echo to the room or something, and you want to make sure that you record those sounds on set so that it's a little bit easier to match up later instead of having to go through the process of trying to match those things in post-production. Typically, when you've called cut on a scene, you can have your sound person move around and go back and record some of these different sounds. This can also be done with dialogue if a scene was a really good take, but it's really impractical to reshoot the scene. That way, not only do you have the scratch audio, but you have two separate takes of the sound effect and of the dialogue. Let's go ahead and start with the boring one, dialogue. This is the boom pole setup. You point the microphone at what you want to record. You record it. Yay! Of course, there's more to it than that. If people are moving around, you're gonna follow them, try to make as little noise as possible. And if you're shifting between two people talking, there's a couple ways that you can do it. If they're both in the same shot together, you're gonna simply rotate the microphone back and forth. It's important that you gaff tape the cords down so that you don't get them shaking up against the boom pole and giving you a lot of reverb going into the microphone. But if you're recording something where somebody is talking in one camera angle and then you're switching to a different camera angle, you're just going to keep the microphone pointed at one person, and then when you move to the other camera angle, pointed at the other person then. When recording audio on a set, it is important to try and monitor your audio as best you can. That way you're listening out for anything like an air conditioning unit kicking on or a refrigerator nearby. Any sounds that you need to take note of that are going to either need to be a consistent sound that you add into your room noise, or things that you're gonna need to take out by turning them off. Or it may be something that you know that you're gonna have to do some ADR later. Now let's move on to the fun one, recording Foley. And it was a very specific reason we had to do this particular Foley, and it was all because of a dumb joke.
Well, I've always kind of wanted to do a piece about, you know, the journey of life, but through the eyes of a cantaloupe. It'd all be in black and white. The soundtrack would be entirely made from fruit-based instruments.
If you're gonna make music with fruit, you're gonna make music with fruit. Now we recorded all these sounds outside because obviously it was very messy.
Oh, the last one was gross.
A lot of times when you're recording Foley, you're gonna be doing a lot of it indoors in a controlled environment, but for things that are gonna be a little messier or more explosive perhaps, you're gonna wanna do those outside for obvious reasons. Now before going out and recording, I had done a little bit of research on some tips for recording Foley, and probably the biggest tip that I got through all of my research and reading was that before you actually record a sound, you need to be able to quickly identify it when you're playing it back later on when you throw it up on your computer. So the simple solution is before you record a sound, point the microphone at your mouth and say what you're gonna record.
First, so this is cantaloupe drop, cantaloupe bounce, cantaloupe boogaloo. A nice dense sound.
Now, like I said at the beginning of the last episode, I am by no means an expert when it comes to audio, hence the mistake that I made with the lavalier mic with the phone. But I do the best that I can, and I do think that sound is an important element when it comes to filmmaking, and something that I tend to notice really gets glossed over. So I wanted to take some time to shed some light on some things that somebody who has no idea really what they're doing with audio can do to really improve their audio. I'm sure you're much smarter than me though. That's everything for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure that if you liked it, you give it a like, and if you want to, maybe subscribe to us. I don't know. I'd also love to hear your comments on my different audio solutions that I've come up with, and if you're way more qualified with audio than I am, I'd love to hear some of your input and thoughts on how I could better improve my audio setups and maybe shed some light on something